The grumpy old man found a stray cat on his porch, but when he learned about its past, the morning sun cast long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns of Elmwood Drive, a peaceful suburban street where life moved at a slower pace. In a modest, two-story house with faded blue paint, George Thompson, a retired veteran in his late 70s, started his day with the same routine he followed with military precision. He woke up at precisely 6 a.m., the old-fashioned alarm clock on his nightstand jolting him awake with its insistent ringing. After a quick shower and a shave, he'd head downstairs to the kitchen, where he'd prepare his breakfast: 2 slices of whole wheat toast, a cup of black coffee, and a bowl of oatmeal. George was a man of simple habits, a creature of routine. His life revolved around the familiar comforts of his home, his daily walks to the park, and the occasional visit to the local diner for a burger and fries. He wasn't a social butterfly. In fact, he preferred his own company, finding solace in the quiet solitude of his home. His neighbors knew him as the grumpy old man of Elmwood Drive. He rarely smiled, his face etched with the lines of time and a lingering sadness that seemed to cling to him like a shadow. He kept to himself, avoiding small talk and politely declining any invitations to neighborhood gatherings. George's gruff exterior was a shield, a defense mechanism he'd built over the years to protect himself from the pain and disappointments of life. He'd seen too much, experienced too much loss, to let anyone get too close. His heart, once filled with the warmth of love and laughter, had grown cold and hardened, like a battlefield scarred by the ravages of war. One crisp autumn morning, as George sat on his porch, sipping his coffee and watching the leaves fall from the old oak tree in his yard, his solitude was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. A skinny, ginger cat with a mischievous glint in its emerald eyes slunk out from the bushes, its movements cautious and hesitant. The cat was a sorry sight, its fur matted and dirty, its ribs visible beneath its thin coat. It approached George's porch with a timid curiosity, its tail twitching nervously as it sniffed the air. George, startled by the sudden appearance of the feline intruder, frowned and let out a gruff, "Shoo! Go on! Get out of here!" The cat, unfazed by George's harsh tone, let out a soft meow and rubbed its head against his leg, as if pleading for attention. George, a man who valued his peace and quiet above all else, was not pleased. "I said, shoo," he repeated, his voice louder this time, but the cat, with its inherent feline persistence, refused to budge. It sat down on the porch, its eyes fixed on George with an unwavering determination. George sighed, realizing that this stubborn creature wasn't going to leave anytime soon. He decided to ignore it, hoping it would eventually get bored and wander off. He went back to his coffee, but the cat's presence was a constant distraction. He could feel its eyes on him, watching his every move. He tried to read the newspaper, but the cat's soft meows and insistent rubbing against his leg made it impossible to concentrate. "What do you want?" George grumbled, finally acknowledging the cat's presence. The cat, as if understanding his question, let out a plaintive meow and looked at him with its big, pleading eyes. George, despite his gruff exterior, couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for the scrawny creature. He knew what it was like to be alone, to feel unwanted and forgotten. He reached out a hesitant hand and stroked the cat's head. The cat purred in response, its body vibrating with contentment. George, surprised by the warmth he felt at the cat's touch, found himself smiling for the first time in a long time. Perhaps, he thought, having a little company wouldn't be so bad after all. The ginger cat, emboldened by George's unexpected display of affection, settled down on the porch as if it owned the place. George, still unsure of this new development, watched the cat with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. He wasn't a cat person, never had been. Dogs, maybe, with their loyalty and eagerness to please. But cats? They were independent, aloof creatures, always doing as they pleased. Yet, there was something about this scrawny, ginger cat that tugged at his heartstrings. Perhaps it was the cat's persistence, its refusal to give up on him. Or maybe it was the way the cat looked at him with those big, trusting eyes, as if sensing the loneliness hidden beneath his gruff exterior. Over the next few days, the cat became a regular visitor to George's porch. Every morning, like clockwork, it would appear, meowing softly and rubbing against his legs. George, despite his initial reluctance, found himself looking forward to these visits. He started leaving out a saucer of milk and some scraps of food, which the cat devoured with gusto. He still wasn't sure what to make of this unexpected companionship. He'd lived alone for so long, content in his solitude. But the cat's presence was slowly starting to chip away at the walls he'd built around himself. One afternoon, as George sat on his porch reading the newspaper, the cat jumped onto his lap, curling up into a ball and purring contentedly. George, startled by the sudden weight, almost pushed the cat away. But then he hesitated, his hand hovering over the cat's soft fur. He gently stroked the cat's back, feeling the warmth of its body against his hand. The cat purred louder, its rhythmic breathing lulling George into a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. He realized with a start that he was enjoying this. He was enjoying the company of this small, furry creature that had somehow wormed its way into his life. The next day, George went to the local pet store and bought a bag of cat food, a litter box, and a scratching post. He wasn't sure why he was doing this, but it felt like the right thing to do. When he returned home, the cat greeted him at the door, meowing excitedly as if sensing the gifts George had brought. George set up the litter box and the scratching post in the spare bedroom, which had been unused for years. He poured some cat food into a bowl and watched as the cat ate with ravenous hunger. He noticed that the cat's ribs were less prominent now, its fur less matted. It was clear that the cat was starting to thrive under his care. As the days turned into weeks, George and the cat settled into a comfortable routine. The cat, which George had started calling Rusty, would spend its days exploring the house and yard, occasionally bringing George gifts in the form of dead leaves and the occasional unfortunate lizard. George, in turn, would talk to Rusty, sharing his thoughts and feelings with the cat as if it were an old friend. He found himself confiding in Rusty about his past, his regrets, and the loneliness that had haunted him for so long. Rusty, of course, didn't judge or offer advice. He simply listened, his presence a comforting balm to George's wounded soul. One evening, as George sat on the porch with Rusty curled up on his lap, he realized that something had changed. He no longer felt the same emptiness, the same ache in his heart. Rusty had filled a void he hadn't even realized existed. He looked down at the ginger cat, its eyes closed in peaceful slumber, and a smile spread across his face. "You're all right, Rusty," he murmured, stroking the cat's soft fur. "You're all right." Rusty's presence brought a whirlwind of change to George's structured life. The once immaculate house was now regularly adorned with cat hair, despite George's best efforts to keep up with the shedding. His quiet mornings were replaced by the insistent nudging of a furry head against his hand, demanding breakfast precisely at 6:01 a.m., a minute after George's own alarm. Newspapers were no longer safe havens for peaceful reading. They were now prime napping spots for a ginger cat who seemed to have an uncanny ability to find the most inconvenient place to curl up. George, the man of routine, found himself constantly adjusting, adapting to the whims of his feline housemate. He grumbled, he complained, he even threatened to banish Rusty to the backyard on more than one occasion. But the threats were empty, his heart softening every time Rusty looked at him with those innocent green eyes. The truth was, George was enjoying the chaos. The house felt less empty, less silent. The rhythmic purring that filled the quiet corners was a soothing balm to his loneliness. He found himself talking to Rusty throughout the day, narrating his activities, sharing his thoughts, even voicing his frustrations. Rusty, in turn, would listen with rapt attention, tilting his head and offering the occasional meow as if in agreement. One rainy afternoon, as George sat by the window watching the downpour, Rusty jumped onto his lap, kneading his paws into George's legs and purring loudly. George, lost in thought, absently stroked Rusty's fur, a sense of calm washing over him. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed the simple act of touch, the comforting presence of another living being. Rusty, sensing George's mood, snuggled closer, his purring growing louder. George looked down at the cat, a small smile playing on his lips. "You know, Rusty," he said softly, "you're not so bad for a cat." Rusty, in response, rubbed his head against George's chin, a gesture of affection that warmed the old man's heart. That evening, George found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He cooked a proper meal. He made a simple chicken pot pie, remembering his late wife's recipe. As the aroma of the pie filled the house, a wave of nostalgia washed over him. He hadn't realized how much he missed the simple pleasures of cooking, of sharing a meal with someone. He set a place at the table for himself and, on a whim, placed a small saucer of tuna on the floor for Rusty. As he ate, he watched Rusty devour his tuna with gusto, a sense of contentment settling over him. It wasn't the same as sharing a meal with his wife, but it was something. It was a start. The days continued to unfold, each one bringing new surprises and challenges. Rusty, ever the adventurer, discovered the joys of climbing curtains, batting at hanging plants, and chasing imaginary foes around the house. George, in turn, discovered the joys of chasing Rusty down from the curtains, rescuing his plants from a furry whirlwind, and laughing at the cat's antics. He found himself taking Rusty for walks in the park, much to the amusement of his neighbors. The grumpy old man of Elmwood Drive was now seen strolling along the pathways, a ginger cat trotting proudly by his side. He even started exchanging greetings with his neighbors, engaging in brief conversations about the weather, the local news, and, of course, Rusty. Life, which had once felt stagnant and monotonous, was now filled with unexpected joy. Rusty, the persistent feline, had not only disrupted George's routine, but he had also opened a door to a world of possibilities, a world where companionship, laughter, and even love were possible again. The crisp air of a December morning brought with it an unexpected challenge. George awoke to find Rusty missing. He searched the house, calling the cat's name, but there was no sign of the ginger feline. A knot of worry tightened in his chest. Rusty had never wandered off before. He bundled up in his warmest coat and ventured out into the chilly morning, his heart pounding with a fear he hadn't felt in years. He searched the yard, the neighboring gardens, even the park, but Rusty was nowhere to be found. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow-dusted streets, George returned home, his hope dwindling with each passing hour. He slumped into his armchair, the silence of the house pressing down on him like a heavy weight. Just as despair threatened to engulf him, he heard a faint scratching sound coming from the back door. He rushed to open it, and there, huddled on the doorstep, was Rusty. The cat was shivering, his fur matted with snow, a deep gash on his leg oozing blood. George's heart ached at the sight of the injured animal. He scooped Rusty up, cradling him close, and rushed inside. He gently cleaned the wound, his hands trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. He bandaged the injured leg, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man known for his gruff demeanor. He settled Rusty on a soft blanket near the fireplace, keeping a watchful eye on the cat throughout the night. He couldn't sleep, his mind filled with worry. He couldn't bear the thought of losing Rusty, this creature who had brought so much light into his life. The next morning, he took Rusty to the vet, his anxiety growing with each passing mile. The vet examined Rusty, assuring George that the injury wasn't serious. A few stitches, some antibiotics, and plenty of rest, and Rusty would be back to his mischievous self in no time. Relief washed over George, so profound that it surprised him. He hadn't realized how much he cared for this stray cat, how much Rusty had become a part of his life. As he drove home, Rusty curled up on his lap, purring softly. George made a silent promise. He would never let anything happen to Rusty. He would protect this creature, this furry companion who had shown him the true meaning of companionship. This incident, this moment of fear and vulnerability, marked a turning point in George's life. It was as if a dam had burst within him, releasing a flood of emotions he had kept bottled up for years. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, a desire to connect, to care, to love. He realized that Rusty wasn't just a stray cat. He was a lifeline, a furry angel sent to heal his wounded soul. And George, the grumpy old man, was finally ready to open his heart to the love and joy that had been missing from his life for so long. With Rusty on the mend, a comfortable rhythm settled over George's life. The days were no longer lonely, filled instead with the gentle companionship of the ginger cat. Rusty, true to the vet's prediction, recovered quickly, his energy returning in full force. He was a constant shadow, following George from room to room, curling up on his lap while he read, and helping with household chores by batting at dustpans and chasing after the vacuum cleaner. George, in turn, embraced his role as caregiver. He meticulously cleaned Rusty's litter box, brushed his fur, and ensured a steady supply of his favorite treats. He even started playing with Rusty, using a feather toy to entice the cat into playful chases around the living room. The sight of the grumpy old man crawling on the floor, mimicking bird sounds, would have been unthinkable just a few months ago. One evening, as George sat by the fireplace, Rusty curled up on his lap, purring contentedly. A wave of memories washed over him. He thought of his wife, Mary, her laughter echoing in the quiet corners of his mind. He remembered their cozy evenings by the fire, her head resting on his shoulder as they read books or listened to music. Mary had loved cats. He could almost see her now, her face lit up with joy as she cuddled a fluffy kitten. He had never understood her fondness for felines, finding them aloof and unpredictable. But now, with Rusty by his side, he was starting to see the appeal. He thought of his time in the army, the camaraderie, the shared experiences, the loss. He had seen too much death, too much suffering. He had come back from the war a changed man, haunted by memories he couldn't escape. He had closed himself off from the world, convinced that he didn't deserve happiness, that he was destined to live out his days in solitude. But Rusty, with his unwavering affection and playful antics, had chipped away at the walls he had built around himself. He looked down at Rusty, his green eyes gleaming in the firelight, and a sense of gratitude washed over him. This stray cat, this unlikely companion, had given him a second chance at life, a chance to heal, to connect, to love again. He stroked Rusty's fur, his touch gentle and reassuring. "Thank you, Rusty," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for finding me." Rusty, in response, nuzzled his head against George's hand, a silent understanding passing between them. The next day, George decided to visit the local library, a place he hadn't been to in years. He wanted to learn more about cats, their behavior, their needs. He wanted to be the best caregiver he could be for Rusty. As he browsed the shelves, he stumbled upon a book about pet therapy, the healing power of animals. He read about how animals could help people cope with stress, anxiety, and depression. He learned about the profound impact animals could have on human lives. A new thought took root in his mind. Perhaps Rusty wasn't just a companion. Perhaps he was a healer, a furry therapist sent to mend his broken heart. He left the library with a stack of books on cats, pet therapy, and animal behavior. He was determined to understand Rusty, to deepen their bond, to embrace this unexpected gift that had come into his life. As he walked home, a sense of purpose filled him. He was no longer just a grumpy old man living out his days in quiet solitude. He was a caregiver, a friend, a companion, and he had Rusty, the ginger cat, to thank for it. Spring arrived, bringing with it a burst of new life to Elmwood Drive. The trees were adorned with fresh green leaves, flowers bloomed in vibrant colors, and the air was filled with the cheerful chirping of birds. Rusty, energized by the warmer weather, spent his days exploring the backyard, chasing butterflies and basking in the sun. George, watching Rusty frolic in the grass, felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. The dark clouds of his past seemed to have dissipated, replaced by a newfound lightness of being. He was content, happy even, a feeling he had thought was lost to him forever. One afternoon, as George was preparing dinner, he noticed Rusty behaving strangely. The cat was lethargic, refusing to eat, and his usually bright eyes seemed dull and listless. A wave of panic washed over George. He remembered the fear he had felt when Rusty had been injured, the thought of losing his furry companion unbearable. He immediately called the vet, his voice trembling with anxiety. The vet advised him to bring Rusty in for a checkup, just to be safe. George, his heart pounding in his chest, gently placed Rusty in his carrier and rushed to the clinic. The waiting room was filled with anxious pet owners, their faces etched with worry. George, surrounded by the sounds of whimpering dogs and meowing cats, felt a sense of camaraderie with these strangers, united by their love for their animal companions. When it was Rusty's turn, the vet examined him thoroughly, his face creased in concentration. After what seemed like an eternity, he turned to George, a grave expression on his face. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "I'm afraid Rusty has developed a heart condition." George's world seemed to crumble around him. He couldn't lose Rusty, not now, not when he had finally found happiness again. He listened numbly as the vet explained the condition, the medication, the lifestyle changes that would be necessary. He left the clinic with a heavy heart, Rusty curled up in his carrier, his breathing shallow and labored. The drive home was a blur, his mind filled with a whirlwind of emotions. He felt a deep sense of injustice, a cruel twist of fate that threatened to snatch away the one source of joy in his life. As he carried Rusty into the house, a wave of determination washed over him. He wouldn't give up, wouldn't let Rusty succumb to this illness. He would fight for him, care for him, love him unconditionally. He settled Rusty on his favorite blanket by the fireplace, administering the medication as instructed by the vet. He spent the night watching over Rusty, his hand gently stroking the cat's fur, whispering words of comfort and reassurance. The next morning, Rusty seemed a little brighter, his breathing less labored. A glimmer of hope flickered in George's heart. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it, for Rusty, for himself, for the bond they shared. This scare, this brush with loss, brought a new level of depth to their relationship. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of life, the preciousness of each moment. George, once closed off and guarded, now embraced vulnerability, allowing himself to feel the full spectrum of emotions, from fear and despair to hope and love. He realized that Rusty wasn't just a companion. He was a teacher, a guide, leading him on a journey of self-discovery and healing. And George, the grumpy old man, was finally learning to open his heart, to embrace the love and joy that had eluded him for so long. The diagnosis of Rusty's heart condition cast a shadow over George's newfound peace. He followed the vet's instructions meticulously, administering medication, monitoring Rusty's diet, and ensuring he got plenty of rest. He even converted the spare bedroom into a cat sanctuary, complete with a comfy bed, a scratching post, and a window perch with a view of the backyard. Despite his best efforts, Rusty's energy levels remained low. The once playful cat now spent most of his days napping, his purrs softer, his movements slower. George, his heart aching for his furry friend, felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch with Rusty curled up on his lap, George noticed Mrs. Henderson, his next-door neighbor, tending to her rose bushes. Mrs. Henderson, a kind-hearted widow in her late 60s, had always been friendly towards George, despite his gruff demeanor. He had often seen her fussing over stray animals, leaving out food and water for them. On a whim, George decided to approach her. He hadn't spoken much to his neighbors since his return from the war, preferring to keep to himself. But now, faced with Rusty's illness, he felt a desperate need for connection, for someone to share his worries with. "Mrs. Henderson," he called out, his voice a bit rusty from disuse. Mrs. Henderson turned around, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Oh, hello, Mr. Thompson. How are you?" Well," George stammered, feeling a bit awkward. "I was wondering, have you ever had a cat with a heart condition?" Mrs. Henderson's smile softened. "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Yes, I had a cat named Whiskers who developed a heart murmur a few years ago. It was a difficult time, but we managed to keep him comfortable for quite a while." George felt a glimmer of hope. "Do you have any advice? Anything I can do to help Rusty?" Mrs. Henderson spent the next hour sharing her experiences with George, offering tips on medication, diet, and creating a stress-free environment for Rusty. She even gave him the number of a specialist who had treated Whiskers. George listened intently, his heart filled with gratitude. He hadn't realized how much he needed this connection, this shared experience with someone who understood his worries. As he walked back home, a sense of community washed over him. He realized that he wasn't alone in this, that there were others who cared, who understood the bond between humans and animals. He decided to follow Mrs. Henderson's advice and scheduled an appointment with the specialist. He also started reaching out to other neighbors, sharing Rusty's story and seeking their support. To his surprise, the community rallied around him. People brought over homemade treats for Rusty, offered to help with errands, and even organized a get-well-soon card signing. George, overwhelmed by the outpouring of kindness, felt a warmth spread through him, melting away the last vestiges of his isolation. He realized that Rusty wasn't just healing him. He was connecting him to the world, opening his heart to the kindness and compassion of others. And George, the grumpy old man, was finally finding his place in the community, a place he had long thought was beyond his reach. The specialist confirmed Rusty's heart condition but offered a glimmer of hope. With proper medication, a carefully monitored diet, and a stress-free environment, Rusty could still enjoy a good quality of life, albeit with some limitations. George clung to those words like a lifeline. He transformed his home into a haven for Rusty, eliminating any potential stressors. He replaced his old, noisy vacuum cleaner with a quieter model, invested in soft, plush carpets to cushion Rusty's paws, and even started playing calming music throughout the day. He became a master chef of cat cuisine, preparing delicious and nutritious meals tailored to Rusty's specific needs. The community continued to rally around them. Mrs. Henderson brought over fresh catnip from her garden. Mr. Johnson, a retired veterinarian, offered to check on Rusty regularly, and the children from across the street would often stop by with handmade toys for Rusty. George, once a recluse, found himself becoming an integral part of the neighborhood. He started attending the monthly potluck dinners, sharing stories about Rusty and his wartime experiences. He even joined the local gardening club, discovering a newfound passion for cultivating roses, inspired by Mrs. Henderson's beautiful blooms. Rusty, despite his condition, seemed to thrive in this loving environment. His purrs grew stronger, his eyes regained their sparkle, and he even managed to engage in short bursts of playful energy, chasing after his favorite feather toy with renewed enthusiasm. One sunny afternoon, as George was working in his garden, he felt a familiar weight settle on his lap. He looked down to see Rusty, curled up contentedly, basking in the warmth of the sun. A wave of emotion washed over him. He gently stroked Rusty's fur, marveling at the resilience of this creature who had brought so much light into his life. He realized that Rusty's illness, while a source of worry, had also been a catalyst for positive change. It had forced him to reach out, to connect, to open his heart to the world. He had found a community, a sense of belonging he had long yearned for. He looked around at his garden, the vibrant colors of the roses a testament to his newfound passion, and a smile spread across his face. He was no longer just a grumpy old man living in a quiet suburban house. He was a gardener, a friend, a beloved member of a community. And he had Rusty, his furry companion, to thank for it. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, George leaned back, Rusty purring softly on his lap, and a sense of contentment settled over him. He had faced his fears, embraced his vulnerability, and discovered a love that transcended species. He had found his purpose, his place in the world, and he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with courage, with hope, with Rusty by his side. Summer descended upon Elmwood Drive, bringing with it lazy afternoons and warm evenings filled with the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. Rusty's health had stabilized, his medication working its magic. He was by no means cured, but he had regained a playful spark, chasing butterflies in the backyard and demanding his daily dose of petting with insistent meows. George, watching Rusty bask in the sun, felt a wave of contentment wash over him. He had faced his fears, embraced his vulnerability, and found a love that transcended species. He had also found a community, a sense of belonging he had long yearned for. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the porch, George sat with Rusty curled up on his lap, lost in thought. He reflected on his life, the choices he had made, the paths he had taken. He thought of his time in the army, the camaraderie, the shared experiences, the loss. He had seen too much death, too much suffering. He had come back from the war a changed man, haunted by memories he couldn't escape. He had closed himself off from the world, convinced that he didn't deserve happiness, that he was destined to live out his days in solitude. He had pushed away friends, neglected family, and built walls around his heart. He regretted those years of isolation, the missed opportunities for connection, for love, for laughter. He had wasted so much time, trapped in his own bitterness and grief. But then Rusty had entered his life, a furry angel sent to heal his wounded soul. The cat's unwavering affection, his playful antics, had chipped away at the walls George had so carefully constructed. Rusty had forced him to open his heart, to confront his past, to embrace the present. He had shown him the true meaning of companionship, the healing power of love. George looked down at Rusty, his green eyes gleaming in the twilight, and a tear rolled down his cheek. "Thank you, Rusty," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for saving me." Rusty, in response, nuzzled his head against George's hand, a silent understanding passing between them. George knew he couldn't change the past, but he could embrace the future. He would cherish every moment with Rusty, every purr, every playful chase, every cuddle. He would continue to nurture his friendships, reconnect with his family, and be an active member of his community. He would live his life with gratitude, with purpose, with love. He would honor Rusty's gift by embracing the joy and beauty that surrounded him. As the stars twinkled in the night sky, George closed his eyes, Rusty purring softly on his lap, and a sense of peace settled over him. He had found redemption, forgiveness, and a love that had transformed his life. He was no longer just a grumpy old man. He was a man filled with gratitude, hope, and a love that knew no bounds. Autumn returned to Elmwood Drive, painting the leaves in fiery hues of red, orange, and gold. The air grew crisp, a gentle reminder of the approaching winter. Rusty, now a senior cat himself, spent his days curled up by the fireplace, his purrs a comforting symphony in the quiet house. George, watching the leaves fall from the old oak tree in his yard, felt a sense of peace he hadn't known was possible. He had come full circle from a grumpy, isolated old man to a beloved member of a vibrant community. He had reconnected with his estranged daughter, their bond strengthened by shared stories and laughter. He had become a regular at the local diner, his presence no longer met with wary glances, but with warm smiles and friendly greetings. He had even started volunteering at the animal shelter, his gruff exterior now softened by a gentle touch and a kind word for every abandoned creature. One chilly afternoon, as George was preparing a batch of his famous pumpkin spice cookies for the upcoming neighborhood bake sale, he noticed Rusty struggling to breathe. His heart ached at the sight of his furry friend in distress. He knew this day would come, but it didn't make it any easier. He gently scooped Rusty into his arms, cradling him close, and sat by the fireplace, the warmth of the flames casting a comforting glow. He stroked Rusty's fur, whispering words of love and gratitude. Rusty, his eyes half closed, purred weakly, nuzzling his head against George's hand. A silent understanding passed between them, a final farewell. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of pink and purple, Rusty took his last breath, his body going limp in George's arms. Tears streamed down George's face, a mixture of grief and gratitude. He held Rusty close, his heart heavy with loss, but also filled with a love that would never fade. He had lost his companion, his furry angel, but he had gained a lifetime of memories, a newfound appreciation for life, and a connection to his community that would forever sustain him. The next day, with a heavy heart but a resolute spirit, George buried Rusty in his favorite spot in the backyard, under the old oak tree where they had spent countless hours together. He placed a small headstone, engraved with the words, "Rusty, my furry angel." As he stood by the grave, the community gathered around him, offering their condolences and sharing their own stories about Rusty. Mrs. Henderson brought a bouquet of roses. Mr. Johnson offered a comforting hand on his shoulder, and the children from across the street placed handmade drawings of Rusty on the grave. George, surrounded by the warmth of his community, felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew Rusty would always be with him, in his heart, in his memories, in the kindness he showed to others. He had come full circle, from isolation to connection, from grumpiness to gratitude, from loss to love. He had learned the true meaning of companionship, the healing power of animals, and the importance of community. And as he looked up at the sky, the sun breaking through the clouds, he knew that Rusty, his furry angel, would always be watching over him, reminding him to embrace life, to cherish every moment, and to never let his heart grow cold.